warning that Gulf energy producers may be forced to halt all exports within weeks if the Iran war continues, a scenario that he believes can even bring down global economies, potentially driving crude to $150 per barrel. Not just that, he went on to say that restarting them would take weeks, if not months. The warning from the Qatari minister came after his country halted LNG production following the strikes from Iran, while Qatar accounts for nearly 20% of global LNG supply. Data shows that India has enough stocks to last over 70 days in case of supply chain disruptions. In fact, as concerns around the world remain high on energy security on the 8th day of the conflict, Indian Petroleum Minister Hardeep Singh Puri has once again reassured that India is in a comfortable position. The minister reiterated that there is no shortage of energy or cause to worry, despite warnings coming from OPEC nations, like we just heard from Qatar, who have now shut their LNG production and account for nearly half of India's LNG imports. Government sources instead have confirmed that they are in touch with major global players to diversify India's import options, adding that already a directive has been issued to private companies to boost their LNG production. Meanwhile, Indian Oil has hiked the price of LPG cylinders in Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata and Chennai with immediate effect.
Larry, the world is very well supplied in oil. Yesterday, Treasury agreed to let our allies in India start buying Russian oil that was already on the water. The Indians had been very good actors. We had asked them to stop buying sanctioned Russian oil this fall. They did. They were going to substitute it with U.S. oil. But to ease the temporary gap of oil around the world, we have given them permission to accept the Russian oil. We may unsanction other Russian oil.
Well, to talk more about the war and also what the implications are for India, we're now joined by Dr. Brahma Chelani, strategic affairs expert, and Mithali Nikore, chief economist, founder, Nikore Associates. Thank you so much for speaking to us. And Dr. Chelani, before we talk about, the energy situation, I'd just like to ask you about the West Asia conflict, given that it is in the 8th day now, it is the second week, and just as Iran earlier today appeared to signal some sort of restraint, apologizing to neighboring countries, say they will not strike unless struck first. Now you have this statement by President Donald Trump warning that Iran will be hit very hard. So does this suggest that now it is going to get worse?
It does suggest that. But if you look at history, escalating bombing campaigns can degrade military capabilities, but they do not, despite causing greater destructiveness, they rarely produce decisive political victory on their own. For example, during the Vietnam War, the U.S. dropped more bombs than the bombs that were dropped right through World War II. But that did not weaken North Vietnamese resistance to the American forces. And we have seen a similar trend, for example, in the Kosovo War, and we saw that in the 20-year Afghanistan War, where despite increasingly harsh bombing campaigns, the Americans ultimately left in humiliation from Afghanistan. So what history shows is that when you step up destruction through these escalating bombing campaigns, you only increase regime resilience, because authoritarian systems can survive enormous physical damage, and Iran's political system is a multi-layered elite and security apparatus capable of maintaining control even under heavy bombing. And of course, when you escalate the bombing and the way the Israelis and the Americans are bombing major cities like Tehran, what happens is that the moderate forces lose out to hardliners. In other words, such bombing campaigns only legitimize hardliners and make it very difficult to achieve a negotiated settlement.
All right. I'm not sure the Trump administration wants to be reminded of their campaigns, in Vietnam or Afghanistan as well. But Ms. Nikore, to you now, let's talk about the energy situation. Qatar's energy minister and his very, very stark warning about oil surging to $150 a barrel if this conflict continues and continues to disrupt Gulf exports. How, in your view, how realistic is this scenario?
So thanks a lot for having me on the on this discussion. I think, to be very honest, let's look at how the last week has progressed. When we began with with this entire war-like situation, oil stood at around $75 a barrel. Now we're close to 100 in just 8 days. And the prediction that has come from the Qatari side is that we might reach 150 in another 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how badly the Strait of Hormuz continues to be blocked. So it does look very likely when we look at the data that we would be proceeding in this direction, that we would be going towards this trajectory. At the same time, this is also benefiting the other suppliers of oil on the global, on the global oil market, because it's not as though the Russians or others are selling oil at a lower cost. They might be selling at a marginally lower cost, but they're still meeting the global oil price. So overall, it's always the oil purchasers in this case, and particularly India, which stands to lose, because the Iranians are actually facilitating the movement for the Chinese oil supply. And India is the second country which is actually impacted by the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz. So actually, in this situation for India, having alternative sources, having our deals with Russia is very critical.
Absolutely. We've already seen, cylinder price, LPG cylinder prices going up in, several cities, and Delhi included. Dr. Chelani, so what does this mean now for India? Will we be forced to increase our purchases from Russia if these supplies remain uncertain for a prolonged period?
The answer is yes, but I think look at the larger energy picture, that even if this war were to magically end tonight, the problem that we are facing today, energy crunch, disruption in supplies, that will continue for weeks, perhaps for months, because of the damage to energy facilities in the Gulf region. Iranian reprisals have hit major energy facilities in Bahrain, in Qatar, in UAE, in Saudi Arabia, for example. The Aramco storage facility has been hit. So it'll take a long time, probably months, to repair these facilities. So in other words, we're looking at higher energy prices, both LNG and gas, for months to come, which means that the world's energy crisis that we know that is staring at us today will continue for quite some time. And for India, this means a much higher import bill, because India is so dependent on oil and LNG imports. And to make matters worse, India has some stockpile of oil and gas, but doesn't have a stockpile, no reserves of LPG, of cooking gas. So disruption of LPG is going to hit Indian households directly and very quickly.
All right. In fact, already, in a sense, started hitting. That's all the time we have, I'm afraid. Thank you so much, Dr. Chelani and Mr. Kore, for joining us on the program. Now, the Indian government issued its first statement over giving permission to the dock Iranian ship Iris Lavan